Do you feel the fire service is handling or even able to handle the sheer breadth and volume of subject matter that the modern day firefighter needs to train on?
I just want to start as well by just thanking Debbie and the Ops Central team for having me on. This is my first time speaking, so it's a privilege and great to be among some great minds here. So looking forward to it. To address your question, Debbie, I suppose the overall view of the Irish Fire Service, I would have to say, yeah, I feel our fire services are handling it quite well. But I spent some time kind of reflecting on this question, and I suppose to give you what I felt would be a more accurate result or response, I kind of needed to come at this from a number of angles. One, I suppose, first of all, is just give a background on the structure of the fire service in Ireland. So we have both full-time and retained, similar to the UK model, and what I believe is kind of similar to the volunteer, or retained is similar to the volunteer system in the US. The full-time explains itself. Crews are in station 24 hours a day. They undertake various training drills on a day-to-day basis, and the national standardized courses. But the retained service, which the vast majority of our fire authorities are, we don't man the stations 24 hours. Rather, we're alerted to incidents via a pager. We make our way to the station and we respond from there. Now, I'm retained myself, and we undertake training courses, initials, refreshers throughout the year, all year round. And normally retained personnel will hold down another employment outside of the fire service. This is kind of where a small, I think, problem kind of comes into it, especially with the volume of subject matter that we're kind of talking about in this question. A lot of our firefighters are required to take annual leave from work to attend other courses here in the fire service. So there was one situation, we had a firefighter who got his yearly schedule for training. And because of the amount of courses that he's done and amount of qualifications he had to get refreshed on and so forth, he was asked to take nearly 3/4 of his annual leave from work to attend fire service training. Now you can imagine this kind of impact on personal life and family life and things like that. Now, and you might be thinking, the relevance of this, but I want to bring it back to the beginning when I said this needed to be addressed from a number of angles. I do feel that senior management across both the full-time and the retained fire services do indeed make good efforts to have the fire crews trained to deal with a broad range of incident types and to meet demands of and expectations of the ever-changing world. But this brings new challenges with it. Recently we had electric vehicle training as more and more of these vehicles are on our roads now, and that's just an example of moving with the times. But as that training need broadens and grows, my initial concern is that while full-time personnel are in a great position to undertake so much of it, I feel here in Ireland that the retained personnel won't be, as I try and balance that two kind of employment situation and the family life. So I think while there is that broad spectrum of subject matter, and I do believe great efforts are made, I don't think it's so much about the availability of courses or training. I actually believe that it's the availability of the personnel, especially in the retained services. Training needs are identified based on risk assessments within our own areas. So, for example, our brigade here in Clonmel in Tipperary, we're trained as swiftwater rescue technicians due to the identified risks of having a river flowing through our functional area, whereas some other brigades within our own service won't have that training need to be swiftwater rescue or anything. So, some stations are trained to a lot, extra courses, so to speak, than some of the other stations. So there's that kind of differential as well. But I do kind of want to finish up, I'll wrap it up a small bit now in a minute. I just want to kind of come at this again from another angle. And I hope nobody thinks I'm playing devil's advocate here. But I'm hoping that it might stir up some healthy discussion. And I'd be interested to hear the thoughts of some of our other speakers and even the viewers with this. But I sat wondering, where does the fire service draw the line on training? We here in Tipperary, we're Tipperary Fire and Rescue Service. Other fire authorities in Ireland have just got their county name with fire service. They've excluded the term rescue. Now, I'm not insinuating or making any assumptions that there's any negative underlining reasoning for this. This just could be a preference of name, something like that. And there may not be nothing in the absence of the name rescue. But But nonetheless, I still ask, where do we draw the line? You know, we already have such a diverse range of skill sets, be it fire, vehicle extrication, hazmat, swiftwater rescue, highline. You know, some of the brigades in Ireland, the Dublin Fire Brigade, are paramedics. They run an ambulance service, you know, confined space. The list of training goes on, and what we're trained to do. But at what point does it become non-viable to keep moving into the area of other types of rescues? You know, paramedics here in Ireland, they get mobilised to incidents within the area of medical care. Mountain rescue operate within their own field on the mountains. You know, our river rescue organisations only operate on the water. You know, will there be a point in the future where the fire service will feel the weight of taking on too much training for different rescue types? Should we draw a line where the fire service says no? You know, we can't do everything, or you know, we can't do everybody else's job. We're certainly one of the most diverse frontline agencies when it comes to our skill sets. You know, I myself, kind of before this started, I counted up roughly 15 different qualifications that I have just for me. You know, who's to say it won't be 20 or 25 in the next 10 years? You know, the public perception of the fire service is that they will always, you know, they'll know what to do. You know, call the fire brigade, they'll just know what to do. You know, regardless of the situation. And I've come across that in my 16 plus years. And sometimes you are faced with something that you were never trained for. But in the long term, you know, is it possible to keep balancing being a fire and particularly a rescue response service? Is it sustainable? You know, what's the financial implications of, you know, adding another 10 training courses for every man in every station? You know, does the infrastructure have to change? You know, do the stations need upgrade? You know, what's the long terms? You know, is it sustainable long term? I don't have the answer to that question myself. I do wonder about it, but I'd certainly love to hear the thoughts and opinions of others on it.
Well, I'll just, again, leading into, so Stephen brings up a very tremendous degree of insights and problematic issues affecting us. When we talk about training in the fire service, it certainly covers as many of our topics that will be discussed here on the roundtable are going to get into. I think generally we are rising to meet the challenges, but the caveat to that is that we are still falling very short based upon the exponential increases, both in terms of the demands on training, the specialization in various areas, as well as the type of training in the various avenues and organizational structuring, and even at the individual or company type levels. You know, Stephen, you made mention of a couple of things here that I made some quick notes on. You know, we talk about training both in terms of initial recruit training, our in-service company level training, certification training, continuing education training, advanced and specialized training. And again, those are falling within such a broad range of the individual components relative to the firefighter, the company or supervisory levels, the command level. Then we get into the administrative and managerial levels at the executive levels of the organizations. I mean, we have such a expanding broad basis of training needs to a very specialized and almost a binned level of domains within our organizations. I think at one time, the fire service was able to meet those evolving challenges head on and meet them almost in a real-time basis. As challenges were identified or emergent issues were identified, the fire service was able to quickly assimilate, identify what those needs were, assimilate, and then put the appropriate programs and training in place to meet those particular demands almost in real time. I think some of the challenges that we're seeing now, that there is such a continuing trend of such a rapid pace of evolving methodologies and practices, research and development, and the suggested insights that are coming out of R&D on a global basis are highly influencing curriculums and programs, and at the same time are creating almost in a instantaneous manner outdated, inaccurate, erroneous, or non-compliant applicable applications. In other words, we have books and textbooks and curriculums that have been developed over decades of time that have been modified and updated on a continuous basis, But with the rapid changes and processes and these emerging practices, they somewhat become outdated almost overnight. And then we're trying to teach emerging concepts and information and materials and so forth, and we just don't have that connectivity. We don't have the ability to maintain the continuity of those particular elements. At the same time, we have diverging, and we have groups that, again, when we talk about our full-time career basis, our retained and volunteers, I think the gap is continuing to increase on a global basis of trying to stay up to speed, stay relevant, and stay current with, again, emerging concepts, practices, methodologies, suggested avenues, and still retain the fundamentals that are so important in these various areas. Continuing education, well, again, let me revert back. We talk about training, education, certification. I think we're doing a good job in the initial, the in-service, and the continuing education standpoint. Those are the opportunities for us to fill in those gaps based upon the emerging areas. The challenge that I see is that we just don't have the availability of time, that luxury of time to commit to the depth and degree that is sometimes demanded of those particular subject areas to really provide the specialization that particular training or material may require of us. So we have a tendency to get a little bit of information out piecemeal or cover the general basis, but not nearly to the depth and degree that's really necessary to create the types of competencies and skill sets that are really necessary, and we send off those companies back into the field. So we have this continuing challenge between field responses, our activities that are relative to field operations, and then we take a look at all of the training related areas, that gap between the availability of what we should be doing, the content and the material and the depth of that material in terms of really creating proficiencies and competencies and skill set levels that are necessary, that go well beyond the generalist to really create the specialist. And that, I think, is one of the most important elements that are challenging us, is that the sheer volume and the degree of information, the technical information that is required of us to really delve into, is far beyond the normal capacity and capabilities of the departmental or the agency levels, whether it be at the department level of a municipality or at the academy level in a regional type basis, and even sometimes at the larger university, institutional, or college level, the academy levels, because we just don't have enough time to be able to take someone out of the field, take someone out of the office, place them into the training environment, and delve into the subject matter that requires a much greater degree of intensity and focal points. So we continue to get that general information out there to meet those particular needs, but I think we're falling short in the continuing gap of developing the appropriate skill set levels. I think when we take a look at two particular areas, aside from the administrative and the managerial ends, but if we take a look at the challenges before us on a global basis, certainly here in the North Americas, we're seeing increasing demand on both the operational and the command level domains. And those two areas are requiring a much greater degree of technical competencies. Certainly, if we talk about just the areas of structural firefighting as an example, the evolving aspects of our buildings in particular, I use this terminology that our built environment is developing at a faster and greater complexity with greater hazards and risks than firefighting, to firefighters than the tactical models are providing for. And those include the methodologies and the practices. We are just not able to get on the front end of it. We're still trying to play a tremendous degree of catch up in those particular areas. But in terms of that focal point on operations and the command, there certainly needs to be a greater emphasis on the general engineering sciences, fire protection, architectural disciplines, as well as the evolving area of human performance. And those two particular areas, I think, are going to be the challenges for the fire service on a global basis to identify what those needs are and develop the curriculums and the methodologies and the practices, and then implement those at a training level to increase those competencies and skills. I think tomorrow's firefighter and fire officer and commander are going to be significantly will look significantly different than what they do here today, here in the early 2000s, than they certainly did in the 1980s and 1990s. So we go back 40 plus years. We've seen the tremendous advancements that we've made in the last 20 years, which really has been a heartbeat away with much of what we've been referring back to in terms of empirical insights that has rolled into our training areas across all disciplines and all organizational structures. But when we take a look at how we operated in that 20 to 40 year period of the 80s and 90s, and then relate that back to the early to late 2000, 2010 period, the next 20 years, I don't think we'll look anything at all like what we are looking at, directly related to the advancements and the issues dealing with, again, our built environment in particular. So a lot of things are overwhelming us. The most important elements here, I think, that are challenging us is the time allotments, the proficiencies and skill set levels of our instructors, the content and materials, and the availability to put that all in place in conjunction with dealing with our day-to-day responsibilities for field response and emergency service activities. So there's that distinction. I'll add one thing here that just came to mind here. One of the things that the states had implemented a number of years past because of those same challenges that we just talked about here is that some of our academies, some of our departments and organizations, in order for you to be a recruit firefighter to become a potential candidate for inclusion in the organization, you had to bring with you, prior to accepting the job and going into the academy level, a number of college credits or some type of initial degrees relative to having a formal competency basis of knowledge, so that we weren't trying to completely provide all of the education that's necessary. In other words, you're coming in with at least 1 or 2 years of training. That is certainly increasing, almost up to the point of having a 4-year college degree to make you eligible to become a recruit firefighter, and then focus in on some of the fundamental areas from a suppression and operational standpoint to help meet that next step increase in particular needs. So I think we have to identify a variety of different opportunities, hybrid systems, training systems, all of which continues to stress us out. But we're still trying to keep moving forward from that particular standpoint.